Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. We often talk about the spark of an idea, but we rarely talk about the fire it takes to keep that idea alive for over 2 decades. My guest today is a master of the long game. Lee Baucom has authored 7 books and spent 25 years building a global community of over 12,000 adults seeking true transformation. He understands that leadership isn't just about having a voice, it's about protecting the vision from the very people it's meant to serve. Lee, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, to get started here, you've lived through the evolution of taking one idea and scaling it to a global level. At what point did you realize you weren't just selling a product anymore, but you were actually carrying the spiritual weight of stewardship?
Unfortunately, I built a lot of the business by accident after I launched the book. So it was back in 1999. I put a book I'd written on the internet as an ebook. That was before Amazon, so there was no comparison. And then that expanded into lots of other pieces that became the Save the Marriage system. And I didn't realize it was building a business. That took me about 2 or 3 years of people contacting me and asking for help. And I was doing that one piece at a time until suddenly we started accumulating. So it took me those years to even figure out what was going on. In terms of it being anything beyond that, in my mind, it wasn't. The accumulation has happened over those 25 years. It turns out if you're building something you believe in and that helps people, there's just natural growth that comes out of that.
Absolutely. I recently discussed how leadership attracts consumers. So, in your 25 years, how have you learned to spot the difference between someone who wants to grow and someone who just wants to consume your energy?
Let's talk about the difference first between consume wants to grow and consuming my information, because that's an easy one. That's not my job. My job is to make sure that I'm providing information for those who are ready for the transformation. But then, if you're getting down to who actually can be in my vicinity, that's a different question. I do believe that we get to choose who we work with. So when I have somebody approach me about working directly with me, as opposed to being in one of my programs that it's on them, that's a different question. I do make sure that we're on the same page. So I require them to have read my material and require them to have committed to several different things, with this as a clear kind of side note. If they don't follow those, we're done on the spot. Like, I don't continue the conversation, because what I set up is the only way for it to be productive. For instance, when I'm working with one person, I can tell pretty quickly whether they're committed to changing their relationship, which is pretty much what I'm working on, or if they're committed to not being not being the wrong person, right? They want to be the right person. They want me to side with them, and I don't do that. So that's a quick exit. When I work with two people, like a couple, I have a rule that they have to both be willing to move forward. I'm not asking for a commitment on what that looks like, but to be willing to move forward. And the whole proviso of that is, if that's not the case, that conversation ends right then, and they'll have to decide what to do from there. So I set guidelines that are clear about how I'll do the work and with whom I'll do that. So a big thing that I'm looking for is for people to say, you know what, this is where I am responsible. So let's just to be clear, the people I'm working with are in troubled relationships, troubled marriages for the most part. And so I can tell very quickly the difference between somebody who is trying to place blame, or those who are willing to say, I'm part of this process. I do believe that in a relationship, there's a dance going on, and both people have their steps. And so I'm looking for where you're able to say, you know what, I am tired of the steps I've been dancing. I'm going to take responsibility to change those steps. And if that's not what I'm hearing, that is a pretty clear indicator for me that they are not on that same path that they claim to be on.
It sounds like the main thing is just ability to take accountability.
It is. I mean, that is the only place that change happens, is when somebody says, I'm ready to make a change. So I'm pretty hard on that. When I was a therapist in the office, I used to, I don't know, joke, but I used to say that people came to therapy for one of two reasons: to change or not to change. And as I've moved into coaching, my desire is to work with people who are there to change.
So, you mentioned that transformation is what people are actually searching for. Why do you think so many people settle for just being inspirational instead of transformational?
Yeah, transformational is a much harder thing to move towards. You can say inspirational things and inspire people, but that doesn't mean they take action. And so I actually think that when people come in, they're looking to find a way through the pain. And so what I'm trying to do is help them see that there comes a certain point when through the pain actually does mean transformation. So just by my own nature, I'm not going to be the person at the top of the mountaintop screaming out. I'm going to be the one saying, here's how you safely climb this to the top. And because of that, I spend a lot more time with the transformation than the inspiration. I'll leave that to others because I know how long that lasts. Not very long. People are inspired for a short amount of time. They're transformed for life, though.
That is true. Kind of pivoting a little bit here. I talk a lot about toxicity and like energy vampires and activism spaces and circles. As a business leader, how do you handle people who use their personal narrative or trauma as a tool to challenge your professional boundaries?
Yeah, so I'm pretty clear about my availability, first of all. I don't just take phone calls and I don't just respond to emails. I can point them in a direction. So that helps a lot. I think a big thing for me is recognizing that there is a place for being available, but that's different than being always available, for instance. I tend to be pretty clear that access is not the same as service, that just being of access is a problem. Creating services for people, ways that people can be with me, that's fine. So I believe at its core, you can help people without being available to everyone. You just have to find a selective way of doing that.
Absolutely agree with that. So, is it possible to scale a mission to 12,000 people without losing the grit and grace that made the original idea authentic?
If you're clear about what that original idea was and it truly is within you, that you live that out. One of the things I see from people is that they, especially these days, they will find something they think will work to market, but that's not truly what they believe. Years ago, I had this experience of talking to somebody, and I basically got him to admit that the way he came up with his product was just to go to the library and pull a bunch of things out of a bunch of different books and kind of swirl it around. And I happen to know that that wasn't representative of his life. That wasn't the way he was living. That's not a sustainable path. You're either going to be on the path that you're describing or quickly going to be revealed as not that. So I think if you're really clear about that, you stay on message pretty easily.
So, you've written 7 books. Does the process of writing get easier as your business grows, or does the noise of the community make it harder to find that quiet creative center?
There's always noise. And that is one of the things that I'm always talking to people, especially authors, about is finding the difference between the signals and the noise. The signals, as I see them, are real opportunities to expand what you do, expand your message, and continue helping people. Noise is people clamoring for you in ways that are not authentic to yourself. So I'm give you a very clear example from my own life. My background, I was trained as a therapist. I then turned around and did, after doing a two masters and a PhD in therapy, I turned around and did 3 years of training as a coach. So pretty well founded in those areas. And when I put this first thing on the internet, now back in nine, I just thought I was selling this product and I was continuing to do my clinical life. And then the phone started ringing from people around the world who wanted coaching. And so I had to adapt to that. And I worked by phone rather than just in my office. So that was a shift. That was a signal because I was doing something that was true to what I normally do. It was just an extension of that. But then I had people who were contacting me going, can you teach us to be certified? They were therapists. We want to be certified in your method. And the first couple of them I thought were curiosities. At about 6 or 7 inquiries, I started going, well, maybe this is an opportunity. And one morning, early morning, I woke up going, wait, do I really want to step into that? Not knowing how people are representing my work, how they're going to carry this out with clients. I would be having my name on something that I had no control over. And that's not in my space. That's not where I wanted to be. And so I realized that was noise for me. Now, I also have a friend who wrote a book and she teaches people to do things her way. For her, that would have been a signal. And so, one of the things that I'm constantly working with authors and with myself is to make sure that I'm listening for the signals and ignoring the noise.
Yep, you have to check in with yourself on what it is you really want to do. So, what does a strong boundary look like? Because we're now in a state of parasocial relationships a lot these days. So, in a digital age where everyone feels they deserve 24 access, especially after what you just said, how do you manage that?
Deserving and acting on it are two very different things. I am happy to schedule with people and I'll send people a schedule link, but that schedule link, for instance, with the coaching requires them to pay first. And so I don't get trapped into the people who want to talk with me but aren't willing to be in that arrangement. I ignore a good many emails that I get. Sometimes my assistant will respond to them and say, if you would like more, here's how you can join a program or get a book, but I'm not there just to respond. Nobody can be. There's just not enough time in the day, especially now. So there are two things going on. People think that there should be availability 24 hours a day. At the same time, we're talking about the whole world. That's a lot of people who can reach out at any point. And so we have to manage that by having some ways of sifting through who needs to get through, and who would be a good match. There are a lot of people who contact me that I can see immediately are not a good match, and we're able to say we're not a match for you, but here's where you could find that.
So, how has your perspective on authority evolved since you first started? Did you find yourself being more protective of your vision now than you were 20 years ago?
I don't know that I'm any more protective. It's a very different world now than it was then, but I am pretty clear about what I'm doing here, why I'm on this planet and what I'm meant to do. And so I stay pretty clear with that with people. When I find a different way of, for instance, sharing a message because maybe a new technology comes out, I am certainly always looking for that opportunity. But what I'm still putting out is the same message that I've been putting out now for 25 years.
So, for people who are currently feeling drained by their own success, or maybe their inbox is full and their mission feels like a chore, what is the first thing they should stop doing today?
Feeling like they have to be available. So my inbox being full, I just happened to pull it up right before we got on, and I have about 3 million unanswered emails in there that have collected over the years. I'm not too worried about that. I don't worry about the email. I don't worry about getting to zero. I do look for the ones that need a response, like that's part of what would be in my world, because somebody wants a response is different than me needing to respond. So I am careful about filtering that out. And I recognize that just accepting that fact. I had a conversation with a friend of mine some time ago who's like, I struggle every day to get my inbox empty. I'm like, why? I mean, who cares if it's empty or not? What award do you get from that? And it was the first time it had crossed his mind that might be the case. And so when we can just start that mindset that I am not responsible for everybody else's agenda, which is exactly what an email is, then I have a little more room to decide what agenda I do want to follow, and that would be mine.
So, what is next for you in this journey of helping people turn their messages into thriving, sustainable businesses?
One of the things that started some time ago was working with authors directly. It was happening informally. First time it kind of popped into my head that maybe we needed to work on this was several years back when I was at an author event with my publisher, and I was helping to put it on. Having been there at another one, I just said, "Hey, I'll come volunteer and help because this is really helpful." And so I had been reading the books of the people who were coming, and I sat down with a person who was there who had a great message, and I said, "Hey, so what's next after this?" And he stared at me blankly and said, "What do you mean? I just finished the book." And I asked what came after the book, and his thing was, "The book is done. He'll wait for the sales." So I mean, I was, people can do them. If that was good for him, that's fine. And then later on at a dinner, the closing dinner, he came over and said, "What were you asking me?" And so we started to have a conversation about what the book could be, if that's what he wanted to do. And just to be clear, I'm always allowing people to make their choices. I'm not going to force the choice. But if somebody wanted something out of that, what would that look like? That conversation was a repeat of several I'd had before, and was the beginning of having lots more with other authors who thought that the book was it. And my thing is, if a reader gets to the end of the book and it's meant something to them and there's nothing left, that's a loss for that person because they needed something to step into. It's a loss to the world because there could be a change there. And it's a loss to the author to not be able to step into something else. to build a business that's based on their message. So we live in what I think is a troubling world situation now where lots of people are feeling a lack of hope, that we need messages that bring us through that. And lots of those messages are contained in books. So I see it as kind of my next thing to help people move from that book into a bigger business, move from that book into something that takes their message to the world in a way that's more transformational than even the book was.
I love that. So, finally, if you could give one piece of advice to the listeners who are struggling to hold the line between their community and their peace, what would that be?
So I know this is hard for lots of authors because most authors who write a message want that message out and feel like they own the message. And so the big piece is that when you have created a message, it's got to be released. You've got to let people either move into that message in ways that are consistent with you, or you've just got to let it go. Like that, didn't happen. I've said this to several authors. There are actually three books that get written in one book. And there's the book that you ended up with, there's the book that you meant to read, and then there's the book that the person read, how they read it. And you're not responsible for how they read it if you're clear with yourself. And so I'm always asking, where's the gap between what I meant to write and what I wrote? And I'm going to fill in those blanks. But how somebody takes that, that's up to them. I also am very clear that I'm going to get negative feedback if I do anything worthwhile. If I'm doing lukewarm, that's one thing. But if I'm doing something worthwhile, there'll be negative feedback along with the positive feedback. And we as humans often get sucked into the negative. So I use it as a rule of thumb that somebody's opinion of me is none of my business. And I am just going to keep moving forward with where I find the strength.
That is some great advice. Lee, thank you for being the voice of reason for those of us trying to build things that last. You've reminded us that a mission without boundaries is just a burden.
Well, thanks for having me.
To everyone listening, if you've written your book and you're realizing it's meant to be something much bigger, you need to look at Lee Baucom's work. He's the architect of the long game. Visit his website to learn more about his books and his mentorship. I will have the link in the show notes. And remember, the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell. Thank you for listening to The Mind of Sai Marie.